The day Joaquin Guzman almost died wasn't supposed to matter this much. In the early 1990s, attempts like that happened in silence, if they happened at all. Quiet moves, no witnesses, no headlines. This one was different. It happened in public, in daylight. And when it failed, the consequences didn't stop with the target. They spread outward, into politics, into the streets, and into the balance that kept Mexico's underworld from collapsing in on itself. What that moment revealed wasn't just how violent the cartel world had become. It revealed who was willing to push past the limits everyone else still respected. At the time, most cartel enforcers worked carefully. They stayed invisible. They made problems disappear and avoided attention. But one man didn't operate that way. He turned to violence openly, again and again, sometimes with purpose, sometimes without any clear reason at all. And the fear he created didn't stay focused on enemies. It crept into alliances, into cities, and eventually into the cartel that relied on him. His name was Ramón Arellano Félix. Ramon wasn't the most powerful figure in Mexico's drug trade. He didn't control the money. He didn't manage routes or negotiate protection. But compared to other enforcers of his era, he represented something new and far more dangerous. Violence used so often, it stopped being a tool and became a habit. And once that line is crossed, power doesn't grow stronger. It starts breaking from the inside. This isn't the story of how close El Chapo came to dying. It's the story of how fear turned into a liability, and how one enforcer helped push an entire system toward collapse. Ramón Arellano Félix was never meant to run the Tijuana Cartel. Inside his family, leadership followed structure, money, roots, political protection. Ramon brought something else. When pressure appeared, he escalated. When limits existed, he tested them. Over time, that instinct didn't just define his role. It reshaped how conflict itself worked in Mexico's underworld. He was born on August 31st, 1964, in Culiacán, Sinaloa, into a family already familiar with smuggling. In the early years, the Arellano Félix siblings moved consumer electronics and imported clothing across the border. It was quiet work that rewarded patience and discretion. Ramon learned the routes and mechanics, but restraint never became part of his approach. Those who knew him young would later say he reacted quickly, took slights personally, and rarely de-escalated once anger set in. By the late 1980s, that difference mattered. In 1988, in Tijuana, Ramon crossed a line that had nothing to do with business. During a party, a neighbor complained about loud music. According to multiple accounts, Ramon shot and killed the man. There was no rival eliminated, no debt settled, no territory gained. The immediate consequence wasn't retaliation. It was normalization. Violence stopped requiring justification. It only needed proximity. In hindsight, it was a warning sign. At the time, almost no one treated it that way. The following year turned excess into doctrine. In April 1989, Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo was arrested, and the Guadalajara Cartel collapsed. The old centralized order disappeared almost overnight. Routes were divided, and the Tijuana corridor, one of the most valuable crossings into the United States, fell to the Arellano Félix family. Roles hardened quickly. Benjamin Arellano Félix handled organization, finances, and political cover. Ramon became enforcement. That same year, Armando Lopez, a trusted associate, sent by Joaquin Guzman, arrived in Tijuana to negotiate access and reduce tensions. In the cartel world, messengers were protected by an unwritten rule. Ramon ignored it. Lopez was killed before talks could begin. The consequence was structural. Negotiation died. From that point on, even silence became dangerous. The rivalry between Tijuana and Sinaloa was locked into a cycle of retaliation. In 1991 in Baja California, another Sinaloa associate, Rigoberto Campos, was killed. This wasn't response. It was reinforcement. Each killing forced the other side to answer. Each answer narrowed the options further. Off-ramps disappeared. November 1992. Puerto Vallarta, Christina Discotheque. By November 1992, the conflict had spilled into public spaces. In Puerto Vallarta, gunmen disguised as police stormed the Christina Discotheque, where members of the Arellano Félix organization were present. Hundreds of rounds were fired inside a crowded nightclub. At least 6 people were killed. Ramon was inside. He escaped through a service exit. The survival mattered less than the signal. Public venues were no longer off limits. Tourist cities were no longer neutral. According to investigators, the incident hardened positions on both sides. On the Sinaloa side, where El Chapo operated alongside Hector Luis Palma Salazar, restraint began to look like weakness. If violence was now public, then responses would be broader. Targets widened. Pressure increased. The conflict was no longer about protecting routes. It was about imposing consequences. From this point on, the war stopped being containable. Early 1993, retaliation without breaks. As retaliation intensified in early 1993, both organizations shifted tactics. Killings were no longer limited to couriers or lieutenants. Associates and close networks were targeted to send messages that couldn't be ignored. Acts aimed at relatives connected to Sinaloa figures, including attacks tied to Guero Palma's family, were widely understood as attempts to force compliance through personal loss rather than negotiation. The consequence was predictable. Retaliation escalated again. Each side now believed the other had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. What began as a struggle over corridors had turned into a contest of endurance, where backing down risked appearing vulnerable. May 24, 1993, Guadalajara International Airport. The breaking point came on May 24, 1993, at the Guadalajara International Airport. A hit team believed El Chapo would arrive in a white Grand Marquis. When a similar vehicle appeared, gunmen opened fire. The target escaped. Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo was killed instead. The aftermath was immediate and severe. Mexico watched a religious leader die in an ambush meant for a trafficker. International media followed. Political pressure exploded. What had once been managed violence became a national crisis. The underworld lost its invisibility. For Sinaloa, the conflict now carried existential risk. For Tijuana, protection grew fragile, and alliances wavered. The cost of escalation became impossible to hide. After Guadalajara, pressure closed in from every direction. In September 1997, Ramon was indicted in the Southern District of California and placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list as fugitive number 451. Movement became dangerous. Protection became expensive. In 2000, U.S. authorities sanctioned him under the Kingpin Act, freezing assets and criminalizing any U.S. business ties. Inside the cartel, shielding Ramon required constant damage control. Ramon responded the only way he knew how, by escalating again. He traveled with fake law enforcement credentials, armed, often surrounded by young gunmen drawn to notoriety. Where other enforcers hid violence to preserve operations, Ramon displayed it. That distinction mattered. It forced rivals to militarize in response and made restraint look like weakness. In 1999, near Ensenada, Baja California, 12 members of a family were murdered over an unpaid debt linked to the organization. Even seasoned observers recoiled. The consequence was decisive. Public tolerance vanished. Political cover eroded. Allies began to distance themselves. Ramon was no longer an asset who intimidated rivals. He was a liability who threatened the entire structure. The end came on February 10, 2002, in Mazatlan, Sinaloa. Ramon was killed during an encounter with Mexican police. Accounts differ. Some describe a traffic stop that escalated. Others suggest a coordinated effort to remove him. What remains consistent is context. He was reportedly in the area, searching for Ismael Zambada. Even at the end, Escalation remained his default response. Within weeks, Ramón Arellano Félix was arrested. Without its enforcer, the Tijuana Cartel fractured into smaller units. It survived, but only as a diminished organization, later led by Ramón Arellano Félix. The era defined by open warfare and uncontrolled retaliation was over. Ramón Arellano Félix didn't change Mexico's underworld by building something new. He changed it by breaking the rules that once kept violence contained. This wasn't the rise of a kingpin. It was what happens when enforcement replaces strategy, and fear stops being a weapon and becomes a liability. When Ramón Arellano Félix died in Mazatlan in 2002, the violence didn't end, it changed. The Tijuana Cartel didn't disappear overnight, it fractured. The loud convoys faded, the public shootout stopped, and what replaced them was something colder and quieter. That shift revealed the real cost of those years. Fear pushed too far, stopped protecting the organization, and started exposing it. Ramon didn't build an empire. He showed what happens when escalation replaces control, when breaking the rules becomes the strategy. The damage wasn't just to his enemies. It hollowed out the cartel from the inside. So here's the question worth debating. Did the Tijuana Cartel fall because the state closed in? Or because one man made restraint impossible? If this story made you think, share your take in the comments. And if you want more deep dives like this, stories that look past the headlines, consider subscribing to Hidden Archives.